Good morning. Good morning. If I can ask everyone to please take their seats. And if everyone could please silence all cell phones. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. If you could find your seats. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ann McDonald, and I'm a proud member of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition's Texas Advisory Committee. I'm happy to welcome you here today for an important lunch discussion about America's global leadership and why it's critically important here in Texas. To open today's program, I hope that you'll all please join me in giving a warm welcome to a familiar face here, Fort Worth Mayor Betsy Price.
Welcome to Cowtown. I usually say howdy, but maybe for this august group I won't. So we're delighted to have you all here, and it's an honor to be with you. Would all of you that are public officials, elected officials, stand so we can recognize you for your service? Thank you. No matter what capacity you serve in, we know you give generously of your time, and that's valued, especially by this group and by every community in Fort Worth especially. I'd also like to take a second on the heels of Veterans Day for a group like this and recognize all the veterans who are in the room. If you would stand, and you deserve a round of applause. This nation, this state, and particularly this city, because we are a defense-oriented military community, Congresswoman Granger knows that better than anyone, appreciate your service and the fact that we're able to stand here today as a result of that. You know, this is a group who knows that we must lead in America and must know that America's lead in position in the world must be global. We simply cannot be isolationists. We must stay strong and be that shining city on the hill. For your first time in Texas, the USGLC has assembled a distinguished group of leaders. I know you're going to have a great time. We believe as leaders, it's not just the right thing to do. We believe it's the smart thing to do. We know that USGLC and its efforts to advance that international effort, a lot of people are listening, from presidential candidates to Congress to the Senate. It's such a pleasure to be able to honor Congresswoman Granger today. My friend and former mayor, Kay, and I are the only two women to have served as mayors in the city of Fort Worth. Kay's a formidable leader and a courageous leader also. Someone said to me, "Are you a little bit scared of Kay?" And I said, "Yes, and you should be." But underneath that, she's tough as nails, but she has a heart of gold and a commitment to her community. But more than that, Kay understands the presence that we must be and fights passionately for us. She's the first woman to serve on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. I remember when you were appointed, that was a big deal and continues to be a really big deal for us now. Currently, she is the only Republican woman serving in both the House and the Senate from Texas. That's a big deal for us, too. Her work as chairwoman of the State and Foreign Appropriations Subcommittee is regarded as one of the strongest measures for support between the U.S. and Israel. Specifically, Kay has been the champion for Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, and it must continue to stay in place. With her voice there, it will. She will be a strong ally to help fight that. She's a tireless supporter of Americans' military and our defense industry, and has always supported the funding of our Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35, and now the F-16, built, I might say, right here in Fort Worth for our friends from Lockheed. She's also worked to curb something that many of you don't know, international poaching, in partnership with our local zoo, because the funding from that poaching helps fund terrorism. Kay followed that line down and is actively engaged in it. Kay, you are a woman who deserves a lot more credit than we can ever give you. Thank you for serving for us today, and thank you for all of your leadership in the years to come and the years in the past. We appreciate your service. I almost forgot, I'm supposed to welcome Ms. Liz Schrader, President and CEO, to the floor, so join me in a round of applause for Liz. Sorry, Liz.
Well, thank you, Mayor Price, and it is just wonderful to be here. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. It is wonderful to be here. Not only General Wald, who you will hear this afternoon, my hero, Linda Payton from Chevron, who you will also hear this afternoon, but there are not too many people I get up at 4:30 in the morning to get on a plane than to see Chairwoman Granger, because in Washington, D.C., you are my rock star, you are extraordinary, but to be here in your hometown, to be able to say thank you to you for everything that you do to support our development and diplomacy efforts overseas, it is really just wonderful to be here in your hometown, to meet your mayor, and to be here with so many of your friends. Thank you for letting us visit with you today. I really came here to not just thank you, but to thank everybody, not just from me, but I am coming here to thank you from somebody that I met in the most unusual place, from a visit I made to someplace far away from here. Now, I have to ask you, if anybody here has ever been to, I know a few of you have, but have ever been to Tanzania? Anybody here been to Tanzania? General Wald, because I went with you. Congresswoman Granger has. So if you've been to Tanzania or anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa, and you go to some of these trips, you go on these very small planes, and then you get into these small little cars and go on these roads that are not very well paved, and then you walk up these hills that really don't have much of a walkway, and you arrive in these fields. And in one of these trips, my first trip to Africa, I did so, and I ended up in this field, and I am greeted by a group of women, and as happens often, they are singing these beautiful songs, and out jumps this one woman. You can see a picture of her, and she jumps out and she says, "My name is Veronica, and I want to be on the internet." And I did what most good Westerners do, and I grabbed my smartphone and I pressed play, having no idea what she would tell me, and she wanted to tell me her tale, which I share with you. And what she told me is that she was in a dire strait. She had nothing to live on, until America came to her. And America came to her in the way of a USAID project called Feed the Future. And the program came to her in what her husband called magic beans. Now, these magic beans were seeds, and they were drought-resistant seeds that were created to try to help grow in her field. And when they came to her, this USAID, or America as she called it, her husband thought that they were very foolish, and thus they named them the magic beans, so he wouldn't use them. So they divided the little bitty plot of land that they had, and his side of the plot of land it floundered. Her side of the land flourished after about 6 months. What she told me is, because of this Feed the Future project, she is now able to own a used truck. All 11 of her grandchildren now go to school, and she is teaching the 11 other women in her village how to plant these seeds and how to bring their crops to market. What she wanted me to do is to thank America, not for giving her a handout, but for giving her a hand up. And what she asked me to do is, when I return to America, to say thank you. And I tell you that story because that's the conversation that we're going to have here today. Because that's what Kay Granger works to fight for every day when she's in Washington. And it matters because a country like Tanzania that's so far away, their exports to the United States, our trade, has increased 500% just in the last decade and is only growing. Our world is interconnected more today than ever before. And you all know that because we see it in the headlines every day. And sometimes it's quite sad. Syria, frightening, ISIS, Iran, Ukraine. We see it over and over again. And so the stories are often quite sad, and we don't hear the stories of uplifting like Veronica. But you get it, and a lot of people don't. But what I see in my travels with U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is more and more do. This is our first large program here in the state of Texas. So let me take a moment to tell you who we are and who you are hopefully going to become a part of. Years ago, the Washington Post called us the Strange Bedfellow Coalition. And we got that name because we are unusual. We bring a lot of unusual folks together. We are a coalition of over 400 businesses and NGOs. Faith-based organizations, we range everything from CARE to Caterpillar to Chevron, from Walmart to World Vision, from Bell Helicopters to Bread for the World. We live across this country in places like Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. We have a bipartisan advisory council that's led by Chairman Colin Powell and includes every living former Secretary of State, from Henry Kissinger all the way to Hillary Clinton and all those in between. We have a growing voice of military leaders, over 160 retired 3- and 4-star generals, including General Wald, who you will hear from today, and 30,000 veterans for Smart Power that have joined their voice. And what all of these different people agree with is that America needs to be a leader in the world, and we need to lead with development and diplomacy alongside defense. Strategic partnerships to advance our economic and our security interests. We advocate for a little 1% of the budget. In Washington, it's known as the International Affairs budget. A lot of people call it the foreign aid budget, but it's so much more. It's our State Department, it's our Peace Corps, USAID. But what does that all mean? It means our diplomats who are in Ukraine, who are fighting against Putin and the Russian aggression. It is the healthcare workers in West Africa who have worked to fight and stop the disease, infectious disease like Ebola spreading. It is the programs that are opening up markets for America's goods and services. It is helping our strategic allies like Israel and Jordan. It is, as the mayor said, doing it because it is not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. So we are here in Texas to broaden our reach and educate more on each other. We could not do it without the partners listed on the screen and in the program, and I thank all of those that are here that have helped us organize the event today. I also thank our advisory committee that is just beginning to form in the state, and we are so thrilled to have it led by Kay Bailey Hutchinson and Henry Cisneros, who have agreed to serve as our state chairs here in Texas. So I thank all of you, those that have already joined our advisory committee and those that are here today, for joining us and being part of our journey to do what our mission is in an organization, and it's written right here, which is simply to work together to build a better, a safer, and I'll add a more prosperous world. So to get our conversation going and to introduce our keynote speaker, I want to welcome two wonderful partners that work with us, part of our Strange Bedfellow Coalition, Dr. Albert Reyes, President and CEO of Buckner International, and Eric Fox, Senior Director and Government Relations at Lockheed Martin. Welcome, Eric and Albert.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for this opportunity to address this strange Bedfellow Coalition. For over 136 years, Buckner International has sought to serve vulnerable children, orphans, their families, and on the other side of the spectrum, senior adults. We've taken private dollars as well as public resources to do this work. And we believe that there is a strong correlation between building healthy families and the sustainability of our communities, our counties, our states, and our nation. We provide child permanency programs for children, put them in foster care and through adoption in healthy families, and then also family preservation to help strengthen families before they fall apart and require the other programs. In 1994, we began offering these services outside the United States, places like Russia, Latvia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Peru, and the Dominican Republic. We exclusively respond to, usually to invitations by heads of state, first ladies, and other high-level government officials. In many cases, we've introduced the concept of foster care into countries that didn't have that way of taking care of children that were hurting. And we've also leveraged our experience to build capacity in other countries where they needed support and help based on the experience that we've been able to have, and in some cases encourage legislation for the welfare of children. The most recent success that we had was a $1 million, resulted from a $1 million USAID grant to build capacity to serve vulnerable children and their families and orphans in Guatemala. Your tax dollars paid for this project, and we were designed in that project to remove children transition them from an orphanage, where usually they're understaffed and overpopulated, into a family environment, a healthy family environment for safe families. And our goal was to move 103 children. So over a 2-year period with $1 million, we were able to move 168 children into permanent family safe environments. We did that under budget and ahead of schedule. We are compelled to serve in these places because of our faith and our convictions. That to practice pure religion is to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep ourselves undefiled from the world. But in addition to that spiritual motivation for this work, I'm here today to invite you to consider that the instability of a family in other regions of the world will eventually impact our way of life as well. So it is in our national security interest to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Thank you. Eric will come now and share.
Thank you, Albert. My name is Eric Fox. I'm the Senior Director of Government Relations at Lockheed Martin, and for anybody that knows me in the room, that's not the first time I've ever been described as strange, so that's okay. Lockheed Martin is honored to be here to join in thanking our dear friend, Congresswoman Kay Granger, for your strong leadership and support of the international affairs budget. We're also proud to be here with USGLC, standing alongside hundreds of large and small businesses across this nation and the great state of Texas. We're here for a very simple reason. Investing in diplomacy and development is not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. Today, 95% of the world's consumers live outside our borders, and the fastest growing markets are in the developing world. These are our current and future markets. America's strategic investments in diplomacy and economic development are critical to advancing our interests in these markets. They help fight corruption. They help promote rule of law. They help open markets for American goods and services. And Texans understand this. Nearly 3 million jobs are dependent on trade, and last year alone, Texas exported $298 billion in goods and services. Texas has been the nation's #1 exporting state for the past 15 years in a row. These critical programs keep America competitive in the global marketplace, which is the key to our economic prosperity. But don't just take my word for it. Listen to some insightful experts who also think this way.
With our economy the way it is today, some people are asking why we're spending so much money overseas and not on creating jobs right here at home. Well, actually, we're not spending much money. Just 1% of our national budget goes to the international affairs budget. That's not a lot. And helping create American jobs is just what that money's doing. If you want to create jobs, you have to create more demand for products and services. You need more customers. And where are American companies finding more customers? Not here, but here. And here. And here. 95% of the world's customers live outside the U.S. 95%! When we sell goods to them, they're called exports. U.S. exports accounted for a big part of our economic growth last year. Half went to developing countries. And their economies are growing 3 times faster than developed countries. And every 10% increase in exports equals a 7% increase in jobs here. So, how do we increase exports? Build new markets for American goods and services. Remember that 1%? America's international affairs budget helps fund programs that improve health and education, supports agriculture development, builds a stable economy, and creates new markets. So if we don't go to the biggest, fastest growing group of consumers, other countries will. Other countries already are. Investing a small amount in global development and diplomacy is not only the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. To make our economy stronger. To create more jobs. For my mom. For my dad. For my neighbor. For me.
How incredibly bright does our future look with children like the ones we just saw. I'm Lillian Pincus, and I'm President-elect of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It is an honor to be here today to introduce our special guest, who just happens to be my good friend, Congresswoman Kay Granger. Congresswoman Granger is well known to the people in this room as chairwoman of the House Appropriations State Foreign Ops Subcommittee. Representative Granger is one of Congress's leading voices on American global leadership and strengthening global stability and security through our development and diplomacy programs. Congresswoman Granger, thank you for your service to Texas and to America. Our nation greatly benefits from your vision and your leadership. Fort Worth, you are lucky to have such an incredible leader representing you in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congresswoman Kay Granger.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you. I hope the Tea Party saw that. I love everything that was said, of course, but let me tell you, I have the best job in Congress, without a doubt. I am an appropriator, which means we determine where the money goes and how much of it goes there, and we work with people as best we can in making those decisions. This morning, I started my morning with an 8 o'clock call from Joe Biden asking money for Central America. We worked together years ago on Plan Colombia. And so what's happening in Central America, you know, with those 58,000 children that walked across our border, unaccompanied, sent by their parents because their countries were so dangerous they couldn't survive there. And if I get in my car on time today, I'll take a call from John Kerry. That was not going to go as well. He wants money for climate change. But there are other things we agree on that are important. But all that negotiation, it really is. You kind of step outside of who's Democrats and Republicans and say, how do we work together on these issues, and issues at such a difficult time, Before I left D.C., I was working on my bill. I'll finish it. It should be finished by the end of this coming week, we hope. And it's also, as we decide in those 2 subcommittees on defense and foreign operations, funding for the F-35 and the V-22, and funding for weapons for the Kurds and Jordanians and all those that we're trying to help. I have been on those, on a defense subcommittee or committee since I came into Congress. I was very lucky. When I came into Congress, they never had a woman, never had a Republican hold that seat. So I got a lot of attention, and I got sort of my choice of committees to serve on, which is just, I didn't realize at the time how good that was. And I said, I have to be on armed services. You know, that's what our defense is so important to this whole entire community. And but highways are really important, and I really need to be on transportation. And then I left the job, and Betsy knows this, the best job in America is mayor. And I said I left that because I thought it really was important to balance the budget, and it looked like we're going to get doing. So I'd really like budget. And there's sort of this, well, Ms. Freshman, you really don't get all those, but I did get them all. I got them all as a freshman because I asked for them and worked for them. So that sort of went into the defense way until it came a time where I could be what they call a cardinal. That's the chair of one of the subcommittees in appropriations. And I didn't ask for it, but I was asked to take foreign operations. And that's because at this time, those two interface all the time. And boy, it came home and came into Iraq because it was too dangerous for the State Department to be in some of those places and doing what the State Department normally does. And so defense took it over. And so we had our military doing work that was peacekeeping. People didn't like that, but that's the only way it could be. But then I saw it and see how interesting it is and how they overlap. For instance, we have the problem about F-16s to China. It's not defense that decides that. It's the State Department. And they decide foreign military sales and how they work in some of those situations. So whether it's Central or South America or China or Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq, what we're doing is we're trying to make decisions that will bring stability to those countries, which helps bring stability to us. And I understood that and worked with it more, I really understood, and my takeaway is that we often win by diplomacy and we threaten through our military, and it's working really pretty well for us. But we have to have the men and women, we have to have the equipment to have that strong defense. And we also understand what we need to do that was talked about. Those little children, I hope those little children run for Congress. We sure need some of them with that attitude. I'll tell you just a short story. And when we had the biggest class, my class when I came in at Congress was 34. We had a class of 77 new members of Congress. Never happened before. And Eric Cantor was the majority leader, and he said, Kay, we've got a big problem, and that a lot of those people ran to be isolationists. We shouldn't be giving that money. We shouldn't be involved in that. If we quit giving all that money, we wouldn't have a problem at home. And what are we going to do about it, Kay? And I said, well, I think we do a lot of teaching. I'm a former educator, so I said I can do some pretty good lectures, but let's figure this out. And so we did, and one of the ways we did is we took them to Israel to say, most of them are pro-Israel, strong, our allies, our important ally. Let's take them there and show them what we do, and then explain we do that in other countries. We help keep Israel safe, because it's the strongest ally we have. It's the only democracy in that part of the world. And we keep them safe, we're safer, and our allies are safer. That's the way it works. So we said, maybe we should take them there, and we did. And for 5 days, that's a long time listening to those people. And so I finally had at my table a little conversation. I said, you understand now what we do for Israel? Yes. And you support it? Yes. I said, it's very important. So you really understand what we're doing in these countries. We're not giving money directly to the country. We're helping with stability and programs there. And the man I was talking to said, yeah, if we didn't give all that money, we wouldn't have a problem with our budget and our debt. And I said, how much money do you think we give? He said, we give 30% of all that we spend. I said, no, we don't. No, that's not right. He said, yes, it is. I said, no, it's not right. And he turned then to the freshman next to him and said, "That's right, isn't it?" Well, I won't tell you who it is, but he didn't have a clue. He had no idea. He just wanted to be out of that conversation. And so then, but he said, "I think it's 20%. And the other one said, "Yes, 20%. I said, "It's 1%, 1%. He started arguing. I said, "I write the bill. I write the bill." And I said, "I chair that subcommittee." He said, "Are you a freshman?" Well, at that point, I got up from my table, walked off to Eric Counter and said, "We're dead." I said, "We're not getting anywhere at this." But it is important. It is important what we do. So as we're doing this and saying we've got your products, the companies you work for, we want them to be in those countries. You help us. You're doing diplomacy. You're giving jobs. You're doing diplomacy because you're doing such good work. But it has to be done, and it has to be done now, I think now more than any other time. You know, one of the things that keeps me up so much in defense funding is what we've done with sequestration. And I got in a lot of trouble just recently when I voted yes for a budget that a lot of people voted no for. And I tell you, all of you who are in business, you know, you put a budget, sometimes you do things you really don't want to do. I wanted to do this. I had no doubts about this. Because for the first time since sequestration, that terrible word, sequestration, first time it was spoken, oh, of course that's never going to happen. It did happen. First time in 4 years, we started beefing up defense. Right now, we have the smallest Navy since World War II. By 2019, our Navy will have a smaller fleet than before World War I. The Marine Corps currently has less than half of the amphibious ships they need, and most of all, our troops are being deployed not 2 or 3 times, or 4 or 5 times. The military fellow that's in my office, I'm so senior in defense that I get a military fellow, active duty. He was deployed to Afghanistan 7 times. We just lost a soldier who was helping us get the hostages out of Syria. He'd been deployed 19 times. 19, he didn't make it. He was killed getting those hostages out. But we don't have enough money. We have to keep sending the same people. And here at Veterans Time, we think about that's not right. So we all want the government to spend less, but it's not just everywhere. It's not across the board. It's you want us to spend it smart. And if we're not keeping our nation safe, and that's where we are right now, then the companies that you want to do business on other lands, well, are you going to? Are you going to be able to? As you do, you spread the word that America's good, and that's what we have to do. I got involved in the first time when we were in Iraq, and the State Department called me and said, "Congresswoman, we think we have a chance to turn the hearts and minds in Iraq by appealing to the women." Iraq at one time was a very sophisticated country, and women had careers and worked, but he said, those women, most of them have left in fear of their lives. But the Constitution is going to say that 30% of the dollar elected have to be women. Would you go to Iraq and talk to those women and bring other women members of Congress with you? I said, yes, I did. I went 3 times. One time it was too dangerous. They blew up the hotel, and we had to go to Jordan to meet those women. We had 6 delegations that came to the United States to help them understand what their possibilities were if they had a voice in the government. It was something I'll never forget as long as I live. Some of the bravest women I've ever seen. Remember where they voted and had those purple fingers? Most of them had never voted in their lives. Most of the Sunnis were told, don't you dare vote. And they did anyway, because they thought that was maybe the only time. And the women that are there are making a difference. And that was my first time of getting involved. So when it came time to name me to a subcommittee, they asked me, would you take foreign operations? And I did. Some of the things I've learned, it was mentioned, Betsy mentioned it, and has to do with some things we don't expect, like part of the state foreign operations budget is endangered species. We have a huge, long history in Fort Worth of being involved in endangered species through our Zoo Foundation. And so most of that had to do with a drought or fires but poaching, killing the animals for their tusks or their hides, had reached an unbelievable point, and it happened very fast. And they briefed me and said, it could be as short as 5 years. There will be no more elephants in the wild. None. Zero. Only zoos. And why is that happening? Because they're killing them for their tusks to fund human trafficking and to fund terrorists. And nobody had put those dots together. When that happened, then we got involved by giving those rangers weapons that our Army uses, because they were being killed from helicopters shooting down a whole herd of elephants, including babies that have no tusk. And they were shooting the rangers. And so we led the way. Other countries chipped in, but we led the way to put funding in there and to stop that and to make sure everybody knew what was happening. In Africa, and I just got back from a long trip in Africa, Africa could be ours. Africa loves Americans because they love George Bush. And when George Bush made the decision to step forward and make a commitment on HIV/AIDS that stunned everyone, $15 billion, some people said, where did that come from? Well, it really came from his heart, because he knew what I knew, because I'd been to South Africa and learned this. 40% of the Africans are unemployed, and over 40% had HIV/AIDS. We went to visit children's homes where not a child in the entire 500 that lived there had a single living relative. Sorry, they lost everything, all of them. But some countries, some in Africa, some companies in Africa had said, we've got to save our employees. And so they had their employees, brought them in, gave them homes to live in, really kept them alive inside their own townships. It was pretty amazing. George Bush and Laura still go to Africa, and I got to meet with them recently, and I said, I will keep your commitment. As long as I'm in Congress, I will keep the commitment that you made to Africa. They love us, and they're understanding what that meant. They're understanding because China's all over Africa. China wants Africa. They're all over Africa, but what they're doing, they're coming in and building things, but they're bringing their own workers. They don't give anyone jobs. They do shoddy work, so the work they're doing is falling apart, and then they leave with all that they found under the ground. And they make off like bandits, I'd say. And Africa's really realized they don't get anything from that, but they get something from America without being, it's not if you do this, we'll do this. It's we're going to come in and do this because you need it. In almost all undeveloped countries, there is a difference in what we're doing, and it helps you, and it helps us. Egypt, when the Arab Spring happened, after that, people that started that came to me and said, would you use your influence to delay elections, because we never thought we were going to bring Mubarak down. We just wanted to be heard, social media. And then what happened? He did step down. That left us in an odd situation because we didn't stand with him, so we have enormous negative reaction to that. But it also helped the Muslim Brotherhood take over as the leaders. We couldn't do that. But you know, if you ask for people to have the right to stand up and vote, then you have to accept who they vote for. And so that was a huge disappointment. But we kept working with them. Let me tell you how it worked out. When that happened, Egypt cut off all relationships with the United States. No one can get a word out. except the people who bought F-16s and been trained, those pilots have been trained. And so the conversation, the only information that was coming out was going military to military through Egypt. And it made all the difference in the world. They used our weapons, they understood it, they had friendships and relationships. It was the most important thing we'd done. And the only thing that could be done because they were so angry. We, in return for buying our weapons, we say, you really need to improve your education. And you really need to get rid of the corruption. And we say that, and we can say that because we've got a relationship. We do that in countries. Jordan, one of the most important relationships we have, because Jordan has a contract with Israel, and they keep that contract. They have taken in more refugees than anyone. This king of Jordan may not make it through because his country is so angry because he's allowed so many refugees to come in. But what we have done is we've helped support that. We have said, you take them into your country and we'll pay for their upkeep and their sanitation and things like that. Don't ever think we're not in there. Our position, my position is keep them as close to their countries as you can, because we hope the war in Syria will someday be over and there may be something left and they can go home. Don't bring them to the United States where they'll never get back. And so help this way, but always know we're giving more than any country in the world. What we're doing with the alliance, those children that came across, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, they're the countries they came from. And from the minute I was asked to do this, I went to those countries and said, we'll help, but you got to make it safe first. So what we were talking about, Joe Biden and I, is how we ensure that happens, how we help with that to keep them safe, to force them into better education, to help them do and help themselves, so those parents will never want them to leave their countries. I met the First Lady of Honduras. We were on the border looking at it, and we went into a place where they had 1,200 children aged 11 to 14 in a warehouse. Boys on one level, girls on the other level, like you'd stack wood. And she started crying. And I said, I think this is the worst I've seen. It's one thing to see kids on the floor of a dirty floor in a bus station, but sort of warehouse like that, it's just not what we want. And so she and I made an agreement that we would work on that and help make them understand what they need to do. One of the things we do that's the very best is helping girls get a good education. There's a thing called Let Girls Learn, and it makes the difference. If a girl learns, if she goes to school, then her children will go to school, and they'll have better jobs. It works for everyone. It works for the family. It works for the community. And the person I got to deal with that was Malala, the girl from Pakistan that was shot in the face because she wanted to go to school. Most amazing young woman I ever met in my life, ever. She is so brave. She is so courageous, and she speaks from the heart. But she says, I lived through it. We've got to do that. This is what all this is about. It's keeping them safe and defense equipment, but it's also saying for the long term, we don't want to take care of countries. We want to help them learn to take care of themselves, with good health care, with good education, with good jobs. That's what it's all about. We are leaders. The United States of America is the leader of the world. And we should never back off of that. We should never give in to that. I went to the World Economic Summit. I didn't know until I got there I was going to speak there. I didn't know the theme was a post-America world. A post-America world was the theme of the meeting. I didn't do that well. So I had to say what I had to say regardless of what they said. But the next year, the very next year, the theme of it was, how do we get America back in the leadership role, because no one's going to take their place. And that's the way it should be. Thank you so much for what you do. It's very important.
Well, that was quite a speech, and Elvis has left the building. She's on her way. But I tell you what, though, really tying that in, the way the Congresswoman was able to tie the international affairs budget to real tangible examples, I thought, as we say in evangelical world, was a blessing to all of us. And speaking of evangelical world, I am David Brody. I work for CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network. I cover the presidential race, which you can find on E! Entertainment Television right after the Kardashians, because that's what this has turned into. I feel like I'm in a reality series and I can't escape. Look, we have a wonderful panel here all around me, and I want to introduce them to you now, and we're going to talk about America's global leadership in the world and why it matters, especially here in Texas. So, Linda Payton, General Manager of Corporate Public Policy for Chevron Corporation. She's responsible for analyzing emerging global policy issues, excuse me, and leading the development and implementation of strategic engagement with NGOs, think tanks, and other stakeholders. So let's welcome Linda to the stage. General Chuck Wald served as Deputy Commander of the United States European Command 2002 to 2006, and also as U.S. Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Air and Space Operations at the Pentagon. The General is here with us today. Why don't we give him a round of applause? I'll give you a round of applause. Oh, and then there's Liz as well, President, CEO, of course, USGLC. Linda, let me start with you real quick. Obviously at Chevron, tell me a little bit about the thinking and the mindset as it relates to why Chevron believes this type of effort at USGLC is so critical, and how development and diplomacy kind of work along the lines of NGOs and businesses like Chevron here, and why you've gotten involved.
Okay, happy to do that.
Thanks.
First of all, if I could just say thank you for having me here today. I was born in New York. I live in California, but I've spent most of my life in Texas, and I am a Texan at heart, so thank you very much.
Wow, there you go. Very nice.
Texas is also very important to Chevron. We have about 10,000 employees here, and we spend a lot of money, and both from a business standpoint and a social investment standpoint. So always very happy to be on a podium in Texas. So why is it important? Why is engagement important to a company like Chevron? I'll start broadly and then I'll talk from a business perspective. So engagement done well, whether it's with organizations like USAID, NGOs, builds economic prosperity. We've heard that today. And when men and women are able to get jobs, good jobs with companies like mine and companies like yours, when they're able to start their own businesses and become suppliers, when children are able to be educated, as Kay was talking about, and when there are health systems in place and there's actually health care available, what you get is stability. You get the kind of environment, so now I'll talk from a business standpoint, the kind of environment that companies like mine need to do business. Places where there's rule of law, where there is stability, where we have an educated workforce, where we have healthy communities, everything that we need, the fundamentals that we need to actually do business and prosper. And so that's why it's important to us, not just for the benefit of our own companies, but also these countries in which we do business.
Very nice. Before I get to the General, let me remind you, there will be a chance to ask some questions to the panelists up here. So we'll do that in about 15 minutes or so. So think of your questions, and it's going to be open mic night. We'll have a microphone come around, and you can ask your question. And it's streaming live, so tell your friends now, and you could be a star. Also, if you're on Twitter, you probably are on Twitter right now on your phones, at USGLC. You can tweet your questions to at USGLC. General, let me ask you a little bit about what you're seeing, so to speak, on the front lines in the military there, as to how development and diplomacy work hand in hand. What have you seen? What has your experience been?
First of all, I guess the Congresswoman had to leave, but I think she hit it. I mean, that was, sure did. If you want to hear something why we do this, she's got it nailed. But a lot of times, and I think the numbers of 1% or 20% is such a great illustration of the kind of lack of understanding what we're doing. But from a military perspective, the irony for us, I guess, is that there's so many military people that actually understand the fact that stability operations or doing things to actually build capacity for nations, wherever they may be. In our case, we did a lot with Africa and the Middle East, but Africa was a little more vivid for me. And the ability to actually have governments that can take care of themselves. So, as an example, Congresswoman Granger mentioned the HIV/AIDS issue with George Bush. And I think, frankly, one of the big mistakes that President Bush made was not taking credit for that more. Nobody hardly knew it. It's actually up to $30 billion a year now for PEPFAR. And you say, well, you know, what's the military doing down there doing kind of, you know, social work for? And it's not even close to being that. The South African military is probably the most sophisticated military in Africa. It's a pretty prosperous country. And we worked with them quite a bit because they demonstrated some of the leadership to actually address African problems when they occurred, Liberia, things like that. But we did a test with their government medical group on 2 of their battalions. The battalion's about 750 troops or so, and they had 80% HIV positive on these 2 units. And of course that's a humanitarian tragedy, but it's also a tragedy because they can't deploy it with HIV/AIDS. So we had about 18 different countries, there's 54 countries in Africa, that we were actually in the military, working with militaries to develop a educational program, a prevention program, and a treatment program for their military members. And the reason was not just the fact that it's a good thing to do, but again, so they could actually take care of their own problems, deploy to places like we talked about, to Liberia, wherever the case may be. And it's kind of an elegant solution because you do good things, which I think if you're an American and don't want to do good things, you're probably not the American I'd like you to be. But also, you do good things for our country from a security standpoint, and from a budgetary standpoint. You know, it costs a lot of money for the U.S. military to deploy, and also you don't want your military out there doing things in places that necessarily we don't have great interest in. So I think the sophisticated approach to this, and I could go on and on about things you can do. I will just give you one real quick anecdote about America. The Congresswoman mentioned that people still expect America to be the example in the world, the leader in the world. Part of being a leader is you criticize a lot, but I've been to, I think last count, 142 countries in my life, and very rarely are there people in any of those countries that don't admire America and wish they could be in America. But one of the things we would do is in Africa is we'd take medical teams with us on some of the deployments to just see the local population. In Chad, we had a team go with us one time, both Navy and Air Force Corps, Medical Corps, and they saw 6,000 Chadians that had never seen a doctor in their life. And those make an impression on people, particularly when they have children. A lot of times they have eye issues, and in the military they collect glasses. When people get a new set, they keep them, they bring these boxes of glasses with on these medical deployments, and the people would put them on until they found something that was pretty close. And a physicist in London made up a set of glasses that looked like Woody Allen glasses, and that had syringes on the bows of the glasses. And you push the syringe in until you get an acuity in your glass. And then you take you tighten the little screw down, take the syringes off, you have a pair of glasses. $18 a pair. 35,000 sets we gave out. And we'd have people like the Congresswoman come to EUCOM, European Command, and hear the briefing and kind of question, what are you guys doing down there? What is this? You know, and I'd bring out a pair of these glasses for them to test it out. And they kind of laugh and look stupid until you finish it. And then you tell them, you know, the first time this person's ever seen anything with acuity is the American flag on a U.S. soldier's arm. You think that doesn't make an impression? So,
yeah, that's a nice. Yeah. And that's the payoff. I mean, you know, there's a payoff to all of this. I'm wondering about the progress. You know, you've seen a lot in 20 years through this movement. Tell me a little bit about what progress still needs to be made. We've heard George W. Bush's name mentioned. I mean, he's done quite a bit in this area. Where does this need to go from here, especially as it relates to the folks in this room and what they can do to kind of get involved in all of that?
You know, I teach, I have the privilege of teaching a class, one class of a course, with Secretary Albright teaches at Georgetown a class called the National Security Toolkit. And every different lecture is on a different part of the toolkit. So one is on trade and one is on defense. And so I come in, I just did it last week, each semester I come in on aid. And so I'd have to go through this history of aid to her students. And last week was on, she has a graduate, and then the next semester is undergrad. So last week was the graduate, so I have to really gear up. So I think about this from a trajectory of where is aid, and I start in where it started in kind of the 1960s in the Cold War era, where aid was not particularly well spent, and it got the bad reputation of being really ineffective. And I tell the students, you know, it's not like this anymore. And I love being in Texas because I can do what the Congresswoman did, which is praise George Bush, because he did something really, really important in the post 9/11 era, which is to really take a look at how we were doing it and change the model of aid to make it really more effective in a way that is moving in a direction that makes me really proud as an advocate and an educator about what we're doing. And what's so great is that for the first time in post 9/11 is we said, you know what, not that it was horrible leading up to that, but saying we're going to look at outputs, not just inputs. And you really see it in the story I told at the beginning of the program about, for example, Feed the Future is, you know, credit this administration and not throwing the other guy's stuff out, and they actually took a lot of the principles of what the last administration did and said, you know what, those were really smart, and they built upon them. And so this program of Feed the Future said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have metrics. We're going to actually take a look at the programs and see what's working and what's not. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to make sure that countries who we're giving our aid to on Feed the Future, we're going to make sure that they have skin in the game, and they're going to have a program on food security to make sure that what we give them, they're going to have a program that they have to do. And you know what? We're going to make sure private sector does this with us, because guess what? Government can't do it all. So we're going to partner, and when we put $1 in, we're going to make sure private sector and NGOs like Albert's program, that you don't do food security, but people who do, join with us. And there's a whole new way of how these programs are working. So the future is public-private partnerships. And so where we're going together is we're going with government doing things that only government can do. What can government do that not private sector isn't going to do? Fighting corruption, opening up rule of law, creating the environment for real economic growth to happen. And that's what you do all the time in your work, and I know others do it too. And so the future is creating public-private partnership to engage in bringing 1 billion people on this planet who live on less than $1.25 a day. That is not good for who we are morally. That is not good for who we are in terms of our security. That is not good for where we are economically. So I think the future is for us to work together to, whether you come from it from any one of those reasons, is to work together to be encouraging our policymakers to say America needs to be engaged in the world, to thank people like Kay Granger when she goes out and makes those tough votes, and say thank you, to be here so that we can applaud her, because this isn't always easy to do in Washington, and to tell the story. And for those of you who want to get engaged in the world, we want to be a platform for you to do that.
Very nice. Linda, let me ask you a little bit about, this is a competitive world. Last time I checked, China has something to say about that for sure. So how do American businesses like Chevron, Texas businesses here in this state, become competitive in this global market that we're seeing out there that's just become just highly competitive? How does this happen? How does this factor into this whole scheme of things here?
Well, I think in the context of what we're talking about today, it is finding ways to have these partnerships that Liz was just talking about. So one thing that we have found that's worked tremendously well in very tough places, such as those that General Wald was just talking about, Nigeria and Angola specifically, where other countries are quite active, as you well know. And what we found is that actually making partnerships with government, with NGOs, and with my own company. We each have strengths, we each have relationships, we each know how to get different things done. And in the past, as Liz was just talking about, people worked on parallel tracks. And what we found is that by working together and by really maximizing all and pulling all the levers that each of us can pull, but pulling them together is what makes the difference, and it's something that is unique to America at this point. And it's something that we have done really, really well. We started, my company started in Angola. We were the first large public-private partnership between a corporation and USAID. And it was right after Angola was coming out of a 25-year civil war. We never left the country. Chevron never left the country all during the Civil War. And afterwards were asked if we could help the country recover. And we knew we wanted to do it, but we knew we couldn't do it ourselves. And so we formed what we called the Angola Partnership Initiative, which some of you may have heard of, because again, it was the first public-private partnership of that scale between a private corporation and the U.S. government. We're now in the midst, I was actually in Washington earlier this week. I serve on the board of the Niger Delta Partnership Initiative, which is a foundation that Chevron provided $90 million in funding for over 10 years. Our biggest partner, USAID. And we're working, but we're also partnering with NGOs like the Fund for Peace, because again, we know that to provide the economic stability, so we're encouraging entrepreneurship, building small businesses, but we're also promoting peace. General Wald and I were speaking earlier about, again, companies like ours and the U.S. military unofficially have to work together, again, because peace and stability is the foundation for allowing companies like ours to thrive and prosper and have our host communities thrive and prosper as well.
And you mentioned peace and stability, which kind of makes me think just for a moment of something that's exactly the opposite, which is in Syria, what's going on. I'm not going to have you, General, get into the whole politics of that in terms of all of the Syrian refugees, 12 million roughly, maybe more now, so many displaced. But it's a humanitarian crisis, and the military has a role here, but what is that role and how does it help global security and the international affairs budget? How does this all kind of help me through this a little bit as to how a situation in Syria can be aided, if you will, by what we do here in America financially?
I could talk about Syria for 3 or 4 days.
Give me about 2 minutes.
Let me just, first of all, say that you have a national asset here, and she's called Liz Schreier. She does more for our country than you ever would imagine on international affairs, and we owe her a debt of gratitude. 2, cost. And it's interesting, the theme always with these events is that we don't spend that much money on foreign aid as people think, which is true. But I gave a talk at the European Union Parliament one time and had lunch afterwards with, and we talked about a lot of this. And one of the parliamentarians at lunch said, you know, I really agree with you that we need to invest more in stability operations or whatever the case may be, in smart application of aid. He said, but my constituency will never get it because if you prevent something, you can't ever tell it didn't happen. You know, I'm going, God, what a crazy idea. So I went to and I said, you know, there's a problem here because people think it's a big investment. So I went to the GAO and asked them to tell me how much money we think we get in return, a return on engagement, or investment, I should say, for aid. Under the auspices of if we don't do that and there's a crisis, what happens? And it turns out for every dollar we spend on foreign aid in stability operations, we prevent $10 in deployment because that's how much it costs, you know. So for all you business people out there, that's a very, very good business case. It also makes sense to me because I always thought the military's job was try to get out of business. You know, I mean, we talk about deployments. I can't tell you how much I've traveled around the world, how many times I deployed, although I enjoyed it a lot of times, but I don't think going to Afghanistan 9 times is what any military person signed up for. And so part of it is how do you get the military out of being the hammer and the nail? Every problem's a nail and we're the hammer, and we need to do better than that. So Syria, I think Syria is a manifestation of the fact that I read again today in the paper, I have a personal gripe when people, reporters, no offense, write that the American public is exhausted by war. And I go, really? Half of 1% of the people that are deployed or even in the military. They're tired of it, I get that. They don't want to hear about it because of pain, but they're not exhausted. Most people in America don't have to do any of that. The military does. And there's a tendency for us to want to draw back from the world right now. I get it. I mean, people have other things they want to think about. I mean, ultimately, you want to have the time to think about where you live locally, how your kids go to school, what they do. And people do get tired of hearing about it, but the fact of the matter is we have no choice. We're a global economy, we're a global world, and we need to lead. And I will tell you that there's nobody in the world that can lead besides the United States. So every time we start getting a little bit more a desire to draw back, as Liz kind of talked about earlier today, the fear that we're becoming a little more insular, maybe even isolationist, big mistake. And we'll end up with things that will cause us way more problems if we don't stay engaged. So Syria, I could probably make a lineage there.
Very nice. I would go to Liz, but I have a feeling it's time to ask a few questions from the audience. I don't know. My spidey sense senses that we're about halfway through. I may be wrong. If we have questions in the audience, so just raise your hand. A microphone will. I see a hand here.
Can I just tell one stat on Syria that I heard the other day? The World Food Program, which provides the bulk of the food going to the Syrian refugees, I was meeting with somebody the other day, and they told me because of the cuts that are going on in terms of funding, they had to cut from giving, think about this number, $29 a month per refugee for the Syrian refugee who's in Lebanon per month. So somebody's living on $29 a month, and it was cut to $13 a month. So I don't know how you live on $29 a month. They get set to $13 a month. No wonder we have people going and going through that horrific trek to Europe, which most people aren't even surviving to. So it's just unbelievable, the conditions of what's going on there. It is so horrific. And what Kay Granger is going through right now, and the reason she had to leave is because she was getting this call from Secretary of State. I know she was planning to stay, but it's because everybody's putting enormous pressure on her around this budget that she has to figure out what to do. And the resources of the pressure of what we're advocating for is to make sure there's enough money in here, because the Syrian crisis, there are 60 million people on this planet that are refugees today, not just from Syria, 12 million from Syria, which are more than ever in the history of the world. I mean, it's just stunning, and that's just one of the global crises around the world. So when we're talking about this 1%, and we have to go to Congress and say, make sure there's adequate funding for the world crisis, it's just unbelievable of what's going on.
And if you're going to win the fight, you have to come armed with facts.
Exactly.
And you have the facts there. Okay, questions around the room?
Craig Rosshaven, Fort Worth results. One of the things that I think needs to be lifted up is how successful the world has been, and we have been, in reducing the rate of children who die before the age of 5, preventable childhood deaths. Since 1990, that rate has been cut in half, and the recently adopted UN Sustainable Development Goal says we can achieve almost eliminating that by 2035. There's a bill in the House and the Senate now, Senate Bill 1911, Reach Every Mother and Child Act, and I just want to know if U.S. Global Leadership Coalition is aware of that and actively supporting bills like that.
We are absolutely aware of it. It's a wonderful question, and we always talk about the bad part of it, and we should absolutely celebrate the great part of it. And it is extraordinary that in addition to the comment that since 1990, the last 2 decades, there's been marvelous success in bringing poverty down, in cutting poverty in half in this world, in bringing the number of children who are dying of preventable diseases, in maternal and mortality, in the number of people who have access to clean water. I can go on and on about how many successes there have been, and yet we still know that there is more to be done. So we are very excited about the incredible success that we're on the Millennium Development Goals, and very excited about the success that we will hope drive and pay attention to around the Sustainable Development Goals that were just announced in September at the in New York, not last month in September. So absolutely, thank you for raising that.
We have about 10 minutes or so left. Let's go over here. Or no, we have someone. There's a microphone back there. Yes.
All of you have such passion for all of these global issues and the development. Can you each tell us what was your personal experience that brought you to this passion, and why you have such a strong advocacy for international relations and development?
That's a great question. The Dr. Phil question. The Dr. Phil, please.
Okay, I would be happy to start. So very early in my career, for probably the first 20 years or so, I was very focused here in the U.S. And then I started traveling both personally and for work around the world. And I saw so much need, but for me, it was actually a trip in a bus across Bangladesh, which I know I don't need to tell you about the issues and the poverty in Bangladesh. But what I saw on that bus trip, which took hours and hours and hours, was hope and so much activity. And in my heart and in my head, I thought, if I could only figure out a way to turn all that activity into prosperity. And for me, that was a turning point. And thankfully, I am so fortunate that I'm able to work on my passion through my job. And we just announced a major initiative in Bangladesh, a $12 million economic development initiative in the area in which we operate. And so I'm going to be able to watch a dream actually become a reality.
I would think that a lot of this can be transferable as you get out of the cubicle, if you will, and get out and get on a bus in Bangladesh, for sure. General, what about you?
John Kennedy. My parents, believing America was special in a non-exceptional way, just we are. And the fact, I've been so many places, Liz is going to Rwanda, and you see some of the things that have happened in the world. I think we as a nation need to be the leaders in a moral way, and that's one of our strengths. And for all the argument about why we shouldn't be engaged, I think that's a terrible thing, but I just think we're a special country.
Very nice. Before we get to, I have a Twitter question, a tweet, I guess. I don't know. Liz, why? This is from May Ferguson. Hello, May. You're out there. Why do you feel it is important for the city of Fort Worth to be more involved in international relations?
Well, I'm passionate about every city in this country needs to be involved, but particularly Fort Worth. You know, you have some of the most interesting business and cultural players and places in the country. And I remember being here early on in my APAC career. I was political director of APAC in early part of my professional career, and I remember coming here when one of the conventions was in Dallas, and I came visiting here, and I learned very quickly this is one of the center of the planet. And your business arena, you need to be a player, you need to be a speaker. I look at some of you folks in Bell and Lockheed that are, the mayor, you talked about it from the beginning. If you don't speak out, I don't know who will. You're an international city, and you have reach, you have trade, you have talent that you need to touch, and you already see the world. You need to bring that back, and you need to be a voice. So I need your help. I need you to teach me. I need to learn with you. I need you to come to Washington, and you need to educate your fellow citizens if you can, but probably pull them in to be part of this conversation. So there are other cities in this world that maybe are not as enlightened, and so we really need you to be a shining star in the world of the USGLC in this.
I'll just add, you've got the most important international firm in the world represented here from the standpoint of business in the world, and that's Lockheed. When you look at the largest monetary program internationally in the world, with how many countries are going to be involved in that, and it's headquartered right here. So, good.
You know, Lockheed has been on our board of directors since almost the start of our organization, and was the first corporation to join our board of directors.
We're going to try to get a couple more questions in. We've been on this side of the room, so we are strange bedfellows, right? We've got both sides of the room, right and left.
Ian Daly from Linking the World. Looking at the security threats we are facing, where do you see the greatest opportunity for strong development and diplomacy to make a difference?
The greatest opportunities are around the globe. Maybe we can do 30 seconds if anybody's got anything on that.
For development?
For development, what's out there?
I'd recommend looking at the Millennium Challenge profile, the countries that and Liz kind of alluded to this earlier, where there's a discipline put into where we put our aid, and there's criteria that countries have to meet to get that aid. So I think that's a great start in that list of criteria. It's a good place to look.
I would add one thing. I think you said security, and the one thing I would say is the Vice President called Kay Granger this morning about Central America. All of the conversation has been on border control when you look at the headlines, and they're missing one of the real important things, which is what I bet their conversation was. What is the root cause of why those kids and why a parent would put their kid on a bus in a dangerous zone to come to a border? Only because there's something worse happening at home. That is what development and diplomacy is all about, is to address the root causes. And why would a parent want to keep their kid at home? That is what this is we're talking about trying to deal with. And it's a lot cheaper.
Good point. Yes. And then maybe one more, we hope, if it's quick.
Hello, my name's Sean Sale. I'm the Veterans Association president at Texas Women's University, an Iraq War veteran. So I joined the military primarily, one of the main reasons is because I remember September 11th vividly and how it mentally and psychologically caused America to absolutely wake up as to what our safety is and our role in the world. However, now I'm around millennials every single day that either were too young or not old enough to remember September 11th, which is terrifying. But one of them said to me the other day that why should we invest in the world if America doesn't invest in me? And although I personally, as a veteran, think that is a ridiculous statement, what I'm trying to say is that there is a generational disconnect with millennials right now, thinking that our role in the world is absolutely worthless militarily, diplomatically. And how do you think is the best way to engage the millennial generation to care about our role in the world?
And let me just step in and say about 30 seconds or so, a minute at the most, because we do have to move. But yes, great question.
Well, people like yourselves need to interface. I think you need to believe what you're doing. I think you need to believe in your country. I think the millennial thing can sometimes be overplayed a little bit, but it's absolutely an issue. But I think all of us here have an obligation to speak about things like this about our country and what we do. I was in the Pentagon on 9/11, and I ran the first 3 months of the Afghan war, and it seems like yesterday. It's 14 years ago. Some of those kids weren't even born yet. But anyway, I just think we all have an obligation to educate. And the last thing I'd say is I think one thing America should do is I think there should be a mandatory service requirement for every person that grows to be 18-year-old. And 1 year of some sort, I think we just need to have people invest in the country.
Very nice. That's very nice. Yeah. One last question. By the way, the panelists will be up here afterwards if you'd like to ask. There's a tip jar. No, there's no tip jar.
Well, I'm an Asian American, and my grandfather served in the war in the Pacific, World War II. He was a Navajo windtalker. But my interest is that as an Asian American, our network represents 15,000 churches in America. And this is the fastest growing minority group and the largest taxpayer among minorities in America. And so we don't have voices a lot, but right now there's a trade thing going on in the Pacific, which is APEC. How do we promote leadership, American leadership in the Asia Pacific, especially with the EEZ, where China right now is taking over that route, and it counts to about $6 trillion a year by bilateral trade, and it counts to about $2 trillion a year American trade that passes through the EEZ. How do we promote that? American leadership in the area, in a sense.
Anyone?
I just think I think the United States needs to stay engaged. So it is interesting. It's one of my pet peeves. When we said we're going to pivot to Asia, it kind of implied we're going to leave the Middle East and Europe. We added Asia. The whole globe is basically connected right now, and it's very complex. I actually think we're doing a pretty good job of actually addressing Asia right now. It's just very big, and it's going to take a lot of time and investment. And the last thing I'd say, kind of an advertisement for the military and aid, we need to keep the budgets going too. I mean, that's a lot of territory to cover.
Very nice. Just some final thoughts, Linda. I know you want to, there's something, go ahead, please, final thoughts.
Okay, great, thank you. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming here today. It's a great turnout, and obviously you either had an interest before you got here, or at least some questions, and hopefully we were able to answer some of your questions, and would just ask that you join those of us up here on the stage and Representative Granger in spreading the word about the 1% of the budget that is used to do so much for this country, for other countries, and for people all around the world. It's imperative. It's a constant battle. I'll just second General Wald's comments about Liz. She is absolutely tireless, and but we all need to work with her on behalf of this very important cause. So thank you.
How about a big hand for the panel, everybody? And some final thoughts.
So I get the last question, which is to introduce one last person so you know who he is if you don't already. One of the first is to thank David, our moderator, was fabulous. To thank my dear friends. I didn't even pay them to say those nice things about me. So thank you to Linda, General Wald. You two are fabulous. I got to travel with General Wald, which is really great to do through Tanzania and Kenya and Ethiopia. And we were on a really little plane. Always take an Air Force general with you when you're on a really small, bumpy plane. And Linda, who serves on our board, is just phenomenal. And who I want you to meet is Jonathan Freddy, who, if you don't know, you have to get to know him because he put this whole thing together. And here's what I want to tell you. The good thing about the USGLC is that we don't ask you for your money, though if you want to give us, we'll take it. But what we do ask you for is your voice. And that's what I've been talking about all afternoon. Because what we need you to do is we need you to give your voice. If you're a veteran, make sure you sign up for Veterans for Smart Power. You are our game changers. What General Wald does when he comes up with me to Capitol Hill is he gets those congressmen to say, really? You're here for talking about the State Department, USAID, OPIC, Judith Pryor is here from one of the other agencies that we advocate for, not the defense budget, and they just surprised them. So veterans, sign up. 2, I saw a lot of you on your phones. Sign up on social media and follow us on Twitter and Facebook because we need your voice there. 3 is to make sure that when you get an email from Jonathan that says, I need you to follow and respond to an action alert, you actually stop and respond. We do not ask you a lot. We are not one of those organizations that will bombard you with action alerts. But when we call upon you, it is important. I've been doing advocacy for 35 years, and I take it very seriously when we ask of your time. You're about to get an action alert from us because she's writing her bill. And I can tell you that when we call upon you, it's because your voice is needed to tell your senators it's an important message and to thank them. There is nothing more important, Mayor, you know, to get a message to say thank you when you do something. So I really urge you to stay involved and be part of our journey. And I'll end with this. You asked the other two, what was the moment that you got and were involved? Mine came about when I was about 10 years old. And when I was 10 years old, I didn't travel around the world. Our family did not have the resources to go travel around the world. But I got dragged. I grew up in suburban Chicago, and I got dragged every weekend in our suburban station wagon where we drove down to the city because we went to rallies to help try to free the Jewish community who wasn't allowed out of the then Soviet Union because of their religion. And I couldn't understand how living in the United States of America in the 1970s at the time, that there were people that were not allowed to get out of their country, let alone vote, which I thought was just something that everybody was allowed to do, that you couldn't do that, and I had to go to rallies and march around in the downtown, in the public square, that I could do that, but somebody literally couldn't get out of their country because of their religion. And somehow I said, I need to figure out how to have a voice. I need to figure out, and I decided when I was old enough that I was going to move to Washington and figure out what I was going to do with that. So I am a big believer in democracy more than, that's what I chose to do with my life, to go out and be a citizen advocate and speak out for things that I care about. You chose to be here, as Linda said, for your day, and I thank you for giving up a little of your time. And I'll ask you again to give up a little of your time when you get an email from me or from Jonathan to say, hey, we need you to just thank a senator, thank a congressman, or ask them to speak out for America's engagement in the world. So thank you all for being up here, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to see you.